A lot of the students that I work with in my one-on-one training with Studio One have come from traditional recording backgrounds, recording live instruments with a microphone, an audio interface, or a mixer. But they're also interested in making use of the virtual instruments that come with Studio One or some of the other third-party virtual instruments that are available. So in this tutorial, we're going to take a look at all of the details that you need to know about recording virtual instruments within Studio One. So here I've got an empty song. I haven't done anything here, changed any settings. And here we have got the browser on the right-hand side. I'll click on Browse to access that. And then we can see we have instruments up at the top, and we can click on this or the tab up above. This is going to take us to the instruments section. And then here we have our Personas folder. And if I click on the disclosure arrow, then we can see with the instruments that come with Studio One. There's some others that I've hidden, but these are going to work for the tutorial. So all we need to do now is just left click hold, and I'll drag this MiTi in, and my MIDI keyboard is already connected. I'm going to press Shift and E to zoom in on our track vertically. And this is automatically armed for recording and monitoring. So now I'm just going to press a key on my QWERTY keyboard or my MIDI keyboard. And we've got sound. So if we'd like to record, all we need to do is click on the record button down at the bottom. Okay, and I'll press the space bar to stop, and we have gotten our virtual instrument recorded. We don't always need to see this, so I can click on the X to close that out. At any time that we'd like to view it again to maybe adjust any parameters, then we can click on the little keyboard icon here and then pop that window back open. Now, if we'd like to edit any of the MIDI information that's been recorded, because when we're working with virtual instruments and MIDI tracks or instrument tracks, as they're called in Studio One, we're not actually recording audio, we're recording MIDI data. So if I double click on this, then we open up the editor down below, then we can see the individual notes that were recorded, and these can be manipulated, lengthened or shortened, and adjusting the level down below with the velocity, and we can even select and use our up and down arrows to move these up and down. If I hold Shift and use the up arrow or down arrow, then we change these by octave. Now, this is not necessarily a video on editing MIDI, so we're going to close this back out and take a look at a few other settings that are important to be aware of. And I'm going to come back to the browser, and I'm going to, let's close up the Personas, and we will bring in a Hive from Yuhi. Let's get that centered a bit and close out our browser. And again, if we'd like to record this instrument, it's already armed for recording and monitoring, so I'm going to click on the record button down in the transport here. Okay, and we'll again click on this little X in the top right corner to close that out. Let's press the space bar to stop. And again, if we need to access that instrument, clicking on the keyboard icon there, we'll get that back open. Now, I'm going to press comma on the keyboard to come back to the beginning of our song. And if you notice here, this actually started recording at bar 7. And that's because when we did our initial recording, we stopped playback here. And so when I added the second instrument and started recording, we then begin at this point. So this is one first thing to be aware of, is that the position of your playback cursor is going to be where you actually begin recording. But if we'd like to move this back to be more in line with our first recording, we can just left click hold and drag that over like so. Now let's hop over to the track column and take a look at a couple of settings here, because it's important to know that when you want to record, the record arm button needs to be engaged, this red button here. And if you notice that the blue button with the little speaker icon, that is turned on by default when we turn on the record arm. If this is turned off and I press my keys on my MIDI controller, we can see that MIDI information is coming into Studio One, but we're not hearing anything, and that's because monitoring is turned off. When I turn that back on, we can then hear our audio again. And this is going to be specific for playing live and recording, the monitor button. If I were to turn this off and then play this back, let's solo this track. Okay, so we can still hear the audio from our Hive when we're playing back. So, but this monitor button is going to be specific for if you want to play your MIDI controller live and hear your instrument back, or you want to record and hear it, you need to be sure that this is engaged. Now let's take this out of solo, and if you notice when I click on this top track, these buttons are automatically turning on, and that's because of a setting here at the top of our track column. We have this wrench icon, and if I click on that, we can see instrument input follows selection. If I were to deselect that and then now select our Hive track, it's not automatically arming for recording or monitoring, and I would need to then manually engage that. Now, we also have a setting because, as we already saw, the monitor is turning on by default when I click on the record arm. And if I come again to the wrench icon, we can see down at the bottom, monitoring follows record. If I deselect that and then select here, okay, and then I arm for record, well, it does actually activate. So let's come back up to the wrench icon, and this one is going to be specifically for audio. So that's my error. We can see that this is under the audio section. But let's go ahead and turn on the instrument input follows selection again, click out of here, and then we can see when I select, these are now automatically arming and monitoring. Now I do believe that there is a section for turning off the monitoring by default. Let's Control comma to hop over to the options menu, and I'm going to click on the advanced tab, and we'll hop over to the MIDI. And so I'm not seeing any option to disengage that automatic monitoring once you click on record arm. But there is another important thing here to take note of, and that's the chase long notes. Now I can't remember if this is on by default or not, but I'm going to go ahead and turn this off just in case this is off by default, which I believe it may be. Let's click on apply and OK. Now let's solo our Hive, and I'm going to start playback. Notice where our playback cursor is here. It's after this note begins, and when I start playback, we don't hear anything until we get to this next note, and that's because the chase long MIDI notes has been disengaged. So again, if I come here, after this note has already sent the note on message, which is going to be here at the beginning, we're not going to have any audio. But again, I'll Control comma. Let's go ahead and check this box again for chase long notes. Click on apply, and then now we're going to start after that note begins, and we will have our audio play back from this note. So that's another setting to be aware of. Now, something else to be mindful of is the top drop-down menus here for our instrument tracks. Now, this top one is going to be where this MIDI information is being directed to, because just because we put a particular instrument on this track doesn't mean that these notes are stuck to only play that instrument. They can be routed to any other instrument that's within this song. So right now we can see Hive, and again, if I click on the little keyboard icon, we see our Hive instrument, and these notes are playing that back. But if I click on this menu here, then we can see all other instruments, virtual instruments, that are in this song. We only have one other one, and that's the Mai-Tai. So if I select the Mai-Tai, and let's move this out of the way, and this Mai-Tai is soloed, I'm going to play back. And that's another thing to be aware of. This MIDI track is muted. So when we mute this MIDI track, the notes are going to be muted as well. And that's specific to the track mute. There's going to be a different function on the mute here within the mix console. So I'm going to take this out of mute and then come back. Okay, so we can hear that these notes are now triggering our Mai-Tai. Now we don't hear the Hive. Why? And that's because, again, if we come back to the mix console, this channel for the Hive is muted. So these are discrete mute functions here. If we have mute engaged within the mix console for our Hive, audio from that instrument is not going to be heard, as we just saw or heard. And then if we mute here, then the MIDI notes are going to be muted, because instrument tracks and channels are really two different things. We can still have a channel within our mix console for a virtual instrument that's used in our song, even if we don't have an instrument track for it. So if I were to select the Hive and then press delete. Actually, I deleted the MIDI part, so let's Control Z and bring that back. We will right click and we will choose to remove track. We could also press Shift and T. Now notice our channel for the Hive is still here, and if I click on this keyboard icon, we can open up that instrument and see it there. And in our instrument rack, we can still see our Hive here. So again, whenever we have a virtual instrument within Studio One, even if we don't have an instrument track for it, we will have a channel for it, an audio channel, because that virtual instrument is sending out audio. The instrument track only serves as a container for our MIDI information, and it directs that MIDI information to trigger the virtual instrument, and the channel is attached to the audio output of that instrument. Let's Control Z to bring back that track. And to further display the differences between the instrument tracks and the channels, I'm going to right click on our MIDI part here, and let's come to our instrument parts, and we can see we have explode pitches to tracks. So I'm going to click once on that, and let's close out our mix console. Now we can see all of those individual notes have been broken out to different instrument tracks, but you can see at the top they're all directed to that one single Multi. If we open up the mix console again, we can see we only have one Multi instrument. We'll close that out, and then if I play this back, okay, so you get the idea here. We have 4 different instrument tracks, but they're all assigned to the one Multi, and we can hear the audio being played back. Now, one instance where this may be useful for you is if you have created a beat with one track and you'd like to break out the kick, the snare, the hats, and other percussion elements, but still have them directed to, say, the impact drum machine or the presence, then you can do that. Another instance would be if you have a multi-timbral instrument, then you can have several instrument tracks directed to that multi-timbral instrument and then have different parts that you're playing. Now let's Control Z to get rid of those extra tracks, put that back as it was, and let's move on to the second field here, which is going to be where we're receiving the MIDI information from. By default, this is going to be on all inputs, and this is generally what I recommend to my students. This way, if you have multiple controllers, say you have 3 different MIDI controllers, maybe one is a drum pads and the other 2 are keyboards, then whichever one you press your keys or pads on is going to trigger this virtual instrument. But if I click on this all inputs, I can choose to have it come specifically from my MPK Mini or specifically from the QWERTY keyboard. So if I choose QWERTY keyboard and I'll press caps lock to bring up the virtual QWERTY keyboard, now I can use the keys on my laptop keyboard to trigger the Multi. Now I know that's a little bit confusing because this says Hive. This is what we put the Hive on, but it's being directed to the Multi. Let's click here and change that back to the Hive, and now you can see the keys I'm pressing here, and we're now triggering that Hive. Now, if I were to press keys on my MPK Mini, we don't have anything. We can see the MIDI data is coming into Studio One. If you look down in the bottom left-hand corner, we have that little orange triangle that's lighting up, but that MIDI information is not triggering our Hive. Let's caps lock to close out the virtual QWERTY keyboard, and we'll switch this to the MPK Mini. And now that is working as expected, but if I were to caps lock to bring back the virtual keyboard and you try to use my computer keyboard, nothing's happening because we have this set to specifically look for the MPK as the controller device. Okay, but again, if we have this on all inputs, I can use my MPK, or I can use the virtual QWERTY keyboard. Now let's take a deeper look at working with multi-timbral virtual instruments. So we will come to the UVI. Let's bring in a Falcon. Okay, we'll close out the browser, and let's go ahead and load up a preset for the Falcon. So Falcon is a multi-timbral instrument, so we can actually have 2 different instruments or 2 different sounds that are playing back from this one device. Let's click on the info view. Okay, so now that this is loaded, we can see our Falcon instrument track here. And if I trigger with my MPK MIDI controller, we can hear that playing back. Now I'm going to add another part to this. And this one is empty. We don't have a preset loaded. We can see that here. But I'm going to click on the folder icon. Now let's come here and load up another preset or another instrument. So now we can see on the left-hand side, we've got our piano and we've got our cello and viola. Now I'm going to go ahead and play my MIDI controller, but we only hear the piano. And why is that? That's because by default, this second preset or the second instrument is looking for MIDI information on A2 or channel 2. If I were to click here and change this to 1, we can now hear both instruments playing, even though we only have one instrument track or one MIDI track within our song. Now, if we close out our Falcon and then open up the mix console, we can see that we have a channel for the Falcon, and we also have a little folder here, and this is a relatively new feature, the instrument bus. And if I click on this, we can see we have main out, and I'll go ahead and play this back. So basically we have a redundant signal, main out, nested within this folder. But let's click on this keyboard icon, and we will come up to the top here, and we have this little button where we can set up discrete channels. So I'm going to go ahead and select out 2 to add a second channel. Take note, within the mix console, we now have out 2. So if I'd like to have these two instruments on separate channels, and this goes back to the differences between instrument tracks and channels, we can do that. So we can see this one is going out on main out, this one's going out on main out. We can see them both here, a signal. But if I were to click on the cellos and viola and select out 2, we now have this virtual mellotron coming out on out 2. And I've turned down the level for our piano. I can take the piano level up, turn the mellotron down. And now we have our piano. Okay, so I hope that this example is making it a little bit clearer and not more confusing about the differences between our instrument tracks or MIDI tracks and the channels that are displayed within our console. Now also take note that when we have this multi-timbral instrument, they're both paying attention to the same MIDI channel, A1. We can also, when we have this multi-timbral instrument, we have this other drop-down menu where we can choose a specific MIDI input here, 1 through 16. And that's not available on our Hive. Okay, let's close out our Falcon. And the last thing I'd like to talk about is just if you're having issues triggering your virtual instruments, how can you go about troubleshooting your MIDI? Now, the first area that I would look at is if you're not getting audio, look down at the bottom left corner to this MIDI section. And when I press a key on my MIDI controller, we can see that that's lighting up. So if you are not seeing that light up when you press keys or pads on your MIDI controllers, I would say reconnect the device, check your cables. If you're using a USB hub, that could be a problem. I've run into that with students that I work with. They're trying to connect their controllers to a USB hub and it's not working right for whatever the reason. It could be the type of port that's being used on that hub, or it could be that the hub is older, or there's some sort of problematic feature about that hub. Now, if we click on the word MIDI, then this is going to open up a MIDI monitor. And so we can see the actual information that's coming in from that MIDI controller. So when I press C3, we can see the description here, note off, note on. If I press another key, and then we can see that information. If I turn one of the knobs, then we can see that information for it. Now we can clear all of this information out and we can check or deselect these check boxes to specifically monitor specific information that we'd like to see for troubleshooting. I'll go ahead and click on Show All. Let's close out of here. Now the next place to look would be this MIDI meter here. So when I press, we can see that that's lighting up, and we know that the MIDI information is coming to our track. If this happens to be muted, again, we can see that that MIDI information is coming to the instrument track, but we don't hear anything, and that's because we've got the mute on here. If we unmute here, but this is muted there, then of course we're not going to hear anything. And that just functions like normal audio tracks, okay? Now the final area would be what we've already taken a look at here, and that's going to be the setting for where Studio One is looking for that information to come from, whether it's going to be the MPK Mini, but we won't work with our virtual QWERTY keyboard. Switching back, as we've seen, now our virtual keyboard works, but the MPK is not working because it's specifically set to that. So pay attention to the input field here. And if you happen to notice, if you have a good eye, Falcon is showing up here. And that's because Falcon has functionality where we can use the arpeggiators within Falcon to send MIDI information to other instruments as well. So if I were to come here and choose the Falcon, and I can send arpeggiation from Falcon. Arpeggiation would send MIDI information to this Hive. So if you saw that and were a little bit confused why, that's the reason why. Okay, so this has been a look at recording virtual instruments within Studio One. And if you're interested in one-on-one training with me over Zoom, I do provide that. You can check out the pinned comment below or the description area of this video for more information. And I hope this has been useful, and I hope to see you in the next tutorial. Thanks for watching.